right, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your gracious host, Richie Mars. Thank you for joining me on Tuesday or whatever day you're listening to this podcast. Again, you can always follow me for updates on Instagram, Twitter, and the TikTok at Retold Richie Mars. Thank you all who listened to last week's episode on Seth Rollins clearing the vision, talking about the character arc that Seth Rollins has gone through within the WWE. I always appreciate the feedback. But this week, it's a time for celebration because this weekend is Money in the Bank, one of the premier events of the year for WWE. And I am going to go over the ugly, the bad, the gruesome Money in the Bank cash-ins of years past. Now, before we get started, I'm going to go over the origins of the Money in the Bank concept, the ladder match, the cashing in aspect, etc., and the cash-ins, how I'm ranking in this bottom top 5, if you will. It's not just going to be about the cash-ins themselves, it's going to be about the superstars, the impact the cash-in had on their careers, and the trajectory or lack thereof that happened after said cash-in, whether it was successful or not within the storyline realm. So how did the Money in the Bank ladder match come to be? For that, we have to go in our Wayback Machine and go back to the year 2005. And Chris Jericho wasn't really fixed into the plans of WrestleMania 21. When usually the plans for WrestleMania matches usually happens around the fall, usually solidified around the winter, and then that's how you would make the WrestleMania card. It's usually after SummerSlam. That's where they will kind of put in a dummy card of these are the matches that we want to headline the show, and then so on and so forth. You start with your main events, what you want to main event the show, and then as time goes on, you kind of fill in the other matches in from there. And Chris Jericho, this is in his second book, Undisputed, he was not fixed in onto anything solid at this point. There was an idea that he would be in a triple threat submission match with Chris Benoit and Edge, despite Edge not really having a mainline submission move at that point. He had the Educator, which was the side sharpshooter, I believe it was, but that wasn't his main finisher. It was more of a once in a while he'll lock in on somebody during a match, but it wouldn't really end the match. And a triple threat submission match is a hard sell in of itself. I don't think they even did one. If they did, I think the only one I could think of was a submissions count anywhere match where it was Daniel Bryan defending his U.S. title against The Miz and John Morrison. That didn't happen until 2011. And it's a really tough sell, like triple threat matches in general, because one person is always going to be resting on the outside, and the other two kind of have to fill in the time. It's just, adding that extra element is just a hard enough factor to present this match, let alone you take away one of the main cruxes on finishing a triple threat match being pinfalls. Submission matches, it's going to get the crowd kind of harder to be invested in false finishes. So Chris Jericho usually talks to Brian Gewirtz, who was the head writer of Raw at the time, about certain ideas that he was having, and a pitch for an idea was a ladder match. But it wasn't a Money in the Bank ladder match. Instead, Brian Gewirtz suggested a Hollywood Dream ladder match, since this WrestleMania would be taking place in Hollywood. And what the Hollywood Dream ladder match is there's a contract of any dream that the superstar would want to be fulfilled. And at the time, this was before his injury in 2005, Rob Van Dam would be the winner, and then his dream would be bringing back ECW for ECW One Night Stand. Brian went and pitched this to Vince, and Vince thought it was pretty stupid. And I tend to agree. Just a Hollywood Dream ladder match, it just kind of sounds like a Super Mario level, and less like a actual WWE match that you could have that can sound like brutal, but also it doesn't really incentivize the winner. It's only good for a one-off, essentially. And there were other ideas to bring back ECW, and I don't think you needed a WrestleMania match to present ECW in the forefront, because it doesn't do the WrestleMania brand any good, and also doesn't do the ECW brand any good, if that's how they were going to bring it back. So they were still spitballing ideas, Bryan and Chris Jericho, and Chris Jericho presented the idea that the winner of this ladder match would win a contract for a future World Heavyweight Championship match on the next night at Raw. So basically, you win the Money in the Bank ladder match, the next night on Raw, you cash it in, and you get an automatic World Heavyweight Championship match. That was definitely a step up, but Vince actually took it a step further, and the winner would have 1 full year to cash in on this contract. Now, nobody knew what the term cashing in would be like. They didn't know if you hadn't announced it ahead of time. They didn't know it was possible to cash it in after another match has been taken place. The term of cashing in was such a new concept that nobody knew how the first would go down. Edge had the idea, since he won the first Money in the Bank ladder match, that since he was a heel at the time, if he just cashed this in straight up, like just saying, I'm going to cash in at Unforgiven or SummerSlam, what have you, it's not a real heel move to do. So he pitched it as, let me cash in after the champion's worn down, and he totally expected to lose to whoever the champion was at the time, that being John Cena, and just putting him over. But Edge got the green light, and cashing it in after the champion has been worn down has been a significant trope in the Money in the Bank mythos, for better or for worse. Since 2005, there have been over 20 cash-ins on multiple championships. The World Heavyweight Championship, the WWE Championship, the United States Championship, the Raw Women's Championship, the SmackDown Women's Championship, what have you. A lot of them good, some of them just meh, but there have been, at least in my estimation, I chose 5 here, that were the worst, that didn't do WWE or the superstars or the creative storylines any favor. And that's what I'm going to base my ranking on. It's the effectiveness of the cash-in, the creative surrounding the cash-in, and where the superstars kind of ended up after the fact of that cash-in. So even if they lose or they don't cash in successfully, doesn't mean they're going to be on this list. First off, some dishonorable mentions. The first dishonorable mention that's not on this list I put is John Cena. Now, usually when you put John Cena in anything, he rarely shows up in a worst of list. And he just missed the cut here because 2012 was the oddest year for John Cena in general. They tried to portray 2012 as the worst year in John Cena's career. And that is debatably not true. Like, he beat Brock Lesnar after he lost to The Rock. He won Money in the Bank. He beat Big Show at No Way Out. And it was just confusing at this time, after he accomplished all of this in WWE, at least some huge victories, that this would be broadcasted as the worst year of his career during the build-up to the second Rock match. And the Money in the Bank cash-in, in theory, is what the John Cena character would do, just cash in straight up against the champion, who was CM Punk. What makes the cash-in a blemish is it was the first cash-in to not cash in the championship. And with that, it was actually smart for John Cena to be the first one to not cash in the contract successfully, because imagine you're the company and you give the contract to a young guy and you tell him to lose beforehand. He could just point to, at least argue that, why do I have to be the first one to cash in and lose when all these other people have cashed in successfully? So now WWE can always point to, well, John Cena cashed in successfully, so you're saying that you're not as good as John Cena. You know, it's just that little fire in the chamber that they could always point to forevermore if someone would take umbrage to losing a cash-in, if that were ever happen. I doubt that would ever be the case. And also, this cash-in was very important in setting up the CM Punk heel turn with the WWE Championship, which is and has been critically acclaimed during his last to final years of WWE. And it set the stage and tone for that character moving forward, especially with his matchups against The Rock in the next year. So overall, I don't think the John Cena cash-in makes this worst top 5 list. Another dishonorable mention will be Braun Strowman's cash-in. A lot of people forget that Braun Strowman was Mr. Money in the Bank at one point. And as a matter of fact, his cash-in would be probably my number 6 on this list if I had a top 10, for instance. But Braun Strowman's cash-in is what you expect a babyface Braun Strowman to be like. It'd be straight up against the champion, who was Roman Reigns at the time. And for whatever weird reason, they felt that Braun Strowman had to become a heel after the fact, even though he was gaining popularity at this time, because he was going against the Shield. And they didn't want Roman to be booed. They didn't want the Shield to be booed. So they decided to turn Braun heel into a bad guy and team him up with Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre as the lovely faction, the Dogs of War. Now, who here remembers the Dogs of War except for me? Now, I would put this, like I said, at number 6. And the reason why it's out of my top 5 is because it had that hellacious bump from Dolph Ziggler and Seth Rollins from the top of the cage at Hell in a Cell. And that ending, man, with Brock Lesnar interfering, it sucked. No one wants to see a Hell in a Cell match end in a no contest, especially when the Hell in a Cell match itself doesn't have a no contest ruling up to that point. I think there was one other no contest Hell in a Cell match, but that was a Raw match, I believe, against Mankind and Kane, and that was more for storyline purposes. This did move the storyline further in that it was going to be a triple threat match at Crown Jewel, Roman defending against Brock Lesnar and Braun Strowman, but unfortunately Roman had his bout with leukemia. He was taken out of the match, which left Brock Lesnar versus Braun Strowman. In my opinion, that should have been Braun Strowman's time, but they felt Brock Lesnar would be the better fit as undisputed champion, or universal champion, what have you. Braun would later get his moment a year after that, and again, I believe it was just too little too late, but Braun Strowman is always going to have that popularity with the crowd regardless of his positioning on the card, and he just went under neck surgery a little while ago, so I wish him all the best. But again, the Money in the Bank didn't really do anything for Braun Strowman's career up to that point. It didn't really hinder his career that much because he was still presented in the same level as he was before. If not, maybe slightly lower, but nothing to hurt his career. My final dishonorable mention, and this might be a controversial take. My final one is Austin Theory. I know. It's blasphemy. He's the only one to cash in on a secondary champion and lose his match. So obviously he should be in the top 5. Hold your horses there for a second. I'm going to explain why I don't think he deserves to be in the top 5 of the worst cash-ins. Numero uno. After Theory won Money in the Bank, they proceeded to do nothing with him. And this is a trope that Money in the Bank usually has. If you win Money in the Bank, you will go on a huge losing streak, depending on who you are. Happened with Daniel Bryan, happened with Austin Theory. Now, I think we can all agree that when Austin Theory won Money in the Bank, that it was too early. He was only about a year or so into his main roster run. I don't even think even a year under this guise of Austin Theory. He had a cup of coffee during the pandemic era, then he was called back down to NXT, and then he was called back up. But he was called up as Vince McMahon's protege, so it made sense that Vince McMahon would insert him into the Money in the Bank ladder match, but with Roman Reigns being the undisputed champion and not losing the titles anytime soon, it was hard to build Austin Theory up as a credible challenger when you keep having him lose all these matches. He lost to Johnny Gargano, he lost to Bobby Lashley, just a string of losses and unsuccessful cash-ins when Roman Reigns was down in SummerSlam and Clash of the Castle. So the obvious choice was to cash in on Seth Rollins, who won the United States Championship. I believe Bobby Lashley interfered in that match that caused Austin Theory to lose his cash-in, so he didn't look as bad as these people in the top 5 would look later down the line in their cash-ins. But it was a bigger part of a story of that triple threat match, similar to Braun Strowman's cash-in. And only 3 weeks later, Austin Theory would win the United States Championship in arguably a more impressive feat against Seth Rollins and Bobby Lashley. Granted, he was pretty much right place, right time, but he would later beat both of them in singles competition, albeit help with Lesnar against Bobby Lashley. So I don't think his cash-in was nearly as damaging. If anything, it was more like a lateral move. Theory's career is also still developing as press time of this recording. He's still one of the young guns on the roster. He's only 25 years old, so I think it's safe to say that he's going to have a lot more opportunities in the future to possibly become Mr. Money in the Bank again when he's more established and ready for that spot. So I don't consider his cash-in against Seth Rollins one of the worst. All right, now that we got that out of the way, now it's time for number 5 in my top 5 worst Money in the Bank cash-ins. This one makes me sad. All of these make me sad. But this definitely hurts right in the gut. Number 5 is when Alberto Del Rio cashed in against CM Punk at SummerSlam 2001. Now, a little bit of a backstory here. When Alberto Del Rio was first introduced on the main roster the year prior, when he was feuding with Rey Mysterio, a lot of people pegged him as, yep, that's the guy who's going to get a load of opportunity. And that was never more present than the Royal Rumble, the largest Royal Rumble in history, when he won that match. And then he lost to Edge, lost to Christian, and it seemed like it was one of those just rip the Band-Aid off kind of moments with Alberto Del Rio, because we all knew that he was going to get the championship eventually. Like, they were grooming him for that spot because WWE was always interested in having a top Latino star for their roster because Rey Mysterio was kind of winding down. The passing of Eddie Guerrero showed tremendous growth in their company, and especially with the Hispanic audience in mind. So it was only a matter of time before Del Rio became the top star. So he won Money in the Bank, and it was almost telegraphed a little bit too obviously because we were still in the summer of Punk, and it just seemed to put a hard left on the plans of WWE because CM Punk was rising and we didn't have anything like that during this time because we were still getting over the hump of what I like to call the guest host era of WWE, where everything was absurdly either PG or not as shocking anymore. And if something did happen that was shocking, like the Nexus reunion, it just kind of fell flat just to feed it to John Cena. This had the opportunity to show us a new guy in that presence to combat with Cena. Originally, it was Randy Orton, but my God, at this point, the John Cena, Randy Orton back and forth, it was just so similar stories between the two because both were baby faces at that point. And with Randy Orton, he had cooled off tremendously after his babyface turn. So CM Punk being that kind of anti-hero that's against the grain, who wanted to be against Triple H and the Authority at that point, was a breath of fresh air. The reason why this cash-in really sucked is mostly the creative behind it. So, I can't wait to get this in long form, but the match between CM Punk and John Cena ended with CM Punk hitting the GTS on John Cena. Cena gets his foot on the rope. Triple H, the guest referee, doesn't see it. counts Cena out, and then CM Punk wins, and then is attacked by Kevin Nash, who was last seen in a guest appearance at the Royal Rumble, and before that wasn't in WWE at least 7 years prior. So that was out of left field. And once he was hit with the jackknife, you always have to keep the Money in the Bank contract in mind, and Del Rio cashed in. Now the problem with this is that Del Rio felt secondary to the main storyline of the show, which was between John Cena, CM Punk, Triple H, Kevin Nash, and later the Walkout. Del Rio was always a secondary character in mind, and that shouldn't be the case when you're the WWE champion, when you're the top champion of the brand. And let's not forget, Kevin Nash said that Triple H texted him that to stick the winner for him, to attack the winner after the match. And of course, it was later revealed that Triple H found out that Kevin Nash stole Triple H's phone and texted it to his own cell phone. It was just so confusing at that point. And it didn't do Del Rio any favors because he didn't have any relationship prior to anybody in that storyline. So it kind of felt like he was shoehorned in. And I remember this weird promo on Raw after the fact, after Del Rio beat Rey Mysterio, retained the title, and John Cena just was yelling, "You cash in a briefcase after everybody worked so hard in this match, and you just think you could cash in a briefcase to win a championship?" Yeah, John, that's kind of the point of the Money in the Bank briefcase. Like, I didn't understand why all of a sudden he was salty about someone cashing in when almost every other person prior to that did the same thing. It just didn't make sense character-wise. It didn't make sense in the realm of the WWE at that point. And everybody in the storyline, which was promising, the Summer of Punk, kind of devolved into a chaotic mess. So Alberto Del Rio, number 5, is the one to kick off this list. Number 4 of the worst Money in the Bank cash-ins of all time is Jack Swagger. Now, with Jack Swagger, it's an interesting case. Much like Del Rio, he was a established very early on as, hey, this is a guy to watch out for. You look at basically from his debut in late 2008, he was pretty much catapulted to the ECW championship, worked with Christian, worked with Tommy Dreamer, worked with a lot of veterans, got drafted to the Raw, and was kind of in the mix for the U.S. title, but was kind of like in and out of the mid-card scene. So when he won the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 26, it came as a shock to a lot of people because I think a lot of people thought Drew McIntyre was earmarked for that spot because he was the chosen one. He was already the Intercontinental Champion. And I believe the rumor was at the time, I'm not sure if this was confirmed of why Drew McIntyre didn't win the Money in the Bank, but I think him and his ex-wife at the time, who was ECW general manager Tiffany at that time, had a huge public fight that got recorded to like some websites. I think TMZ picked it up. So I think Drew McIntyre was kind of in the doghouse for that. So they switched the winner from Drew McIntyre to Jack Swagger. And on paper, Jack Swagger has all the tools you want in a world champion. Collegiate background. He has the height. He has the moveset at that time. But it wasn't firmly established of, hey, this guy can be a future world champion. At least not yet. Maybe another year or two of development, and then I think he would have been taken more seriously as a world heavyweight champion. So Jack Swagger wins, and the next night in Raw, he tries to cash in on John Cena, and John Cena fights back, and then Jack Swagger doesn't cash in, and he doesn't cash in until the next night on the taped SmackDown, beats Chris Jericho, becomes the world heavyweight champion, and that was the meme photo of he was just so stoic which was a really odd move because Jack Swagger was kind of like, he was like a jock in his persona. Like, he was always cocky, arrogant, did the on your knees pose to go with his theme song, and then would do the push up with the pyro. But they try to shift it into like Jack Swagger was all of a sudden serious when he didn't portray any of those serious mannerisms. It was just an odd 180 shift to the Jack Swagger character. They later played with it during his World Heavyweight Championship run about going through all of his accomplishments. I think he brought his dad in, or somebody to play his dad, and he got like chokeslammed by Kane or something. But the cash-ins didn't really do him any favors after the fact. After he lost the World Heavyweight Championship, it's like it never happened. The cash-in didn't raise Swagger's stock. If anything, it kind of brought the World Heavyweight Championship down because he wasn't the main focus of the show on SmackDown. It was just kind of like a weird position to be in because here's a guy who should be treated like the main guy, but he was just treated like just another guy. He just had a world title on him. And that's a really unfortunate and unfair position to be in because Swagger, I think, is very talented. Even today, as Jake Hager in AEW, I think he's very talented. It's just he was never put in a favorable position or a favorable storyline where he could develop a personality that would click with the audience. And I think having that Money in the Bank hot-shotted to him into that position kind of put a stamp on, this guy's not ready. And once you fail at a position that high, it will take years and years for you to rebuild themselves. And they tried it again, but unfortunately things didn't work out, and Swagger was never seen in the same light as a World Heavyweight Champion again. I will say a fun fact about the Jack Swagger cash-in in general. This was the last cash-in that Edge was involved with in some way, shape, or form. He was a part of the first one, obviously. The second one, he helped Rob Van Dam win. The third one, obviously, he cashed in on The Undertaker after he defeated Mr. Kennedy for his Money in the Bank briefcase. CM Punk then cashed in on him. Then the next year, he lost to Jeff Hardy in a world title ladder match, and then CM Punk cashed in again. And in this one, Swagger attacked him with the briefcase, which led him into cashing in on Chris Jericho for the World Heavyweight Championship. So it's a fun little trivia note that in all the early cash-ins before the Money in the Bank pay-per-view, Edge was involved in a cash-in in some way, shape, or form. Just a cool little trivia note that I found pretty amusing. All right, the number 3 cash-in of the worst ones of all time. And again, this has nothing to do with the talent involved. This is just the creative circumstances around it. Number 3, I put Sheamus. When Sheamus won the Money in the Bank contract in 2015, it was definitely a head-scratcher because they kind of soft rebooted his character to be a bully, but he wasn't a very threatening heel at this point. He lost to Dolph Ziggler in a Kiss Me Arse match, but he forced Dolph to kiss his arse instead, and then the rematch, which I thought was a very underrated match. That was the match where Dolph Ziggler was like bleeding and kind of like gladiator style. Sheamus kicked Ziggler while he was on his knees, and apparently, and this comes from their Celtic Warrior workout session together, they thought Dolph Ziggler bladed on purpose to try to get himself over when it was an actual legit cut. And he showed them and they still didn't believe him. Just a little funny sidebar where it's just like, what? That's weird that they thought that. But yeah, Sheamus lost to Ziggler. He lost the lovely Elimination Chamber match for the Intercontinental Championship. The infamous Elimination Chamber, which went off the rails really quickly. Can't wait to go over that in the future. But it wasn't like they were building him for anything special, let alone being their next guy to face Roman Reigns. And let me set the stage right here. So Sheamus was in a feud with Randy Orton. They traded wins back and forth. and then he was kind of relegated to the middle of the card. And Survivor Series was the end of the WWE Championship tournament that they held because Seth Rollins injured his knee and had to vacate the championship. So the finals were, or the semifinals were, I believe, Roman and Del Rio, and then Ambrose and Kevin Owens. And early in the night, Sheamus participated in a traditional Survivor Series elimination match with the New Day. It was pretty funny that he said they were going to get jiggy all over their opponents, which I don't even know what that means. But it's not something you would think that later in the night, an hour and a half later, that this man who said we're going to get jiggy all over the opponents is going to cash in on arguably the number one good guy in the company. There was just another disconnect in creative. And a lot of people thought that it would be the worst case scenario because people didn't want Roman Reigns near the WWE Championship at this point because they saw him as a John Cena light character when Roman should be anything but a John Cena light character. Just look at his recent work with the Bloodline as an example. That's the role he should have been in the beginning. But they felt the need to put their WWE stamp on his personality because, well, it worked with John Cena, it should work with Roman. And that's just a really weird disconnect to have. Just because it worked for one guy means that these mixed reactions would work for the other guy. Again, very strange how they put upon it. And the final of the match was Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose. And you could tell they were kind of holding back because they thought they would have a better, more prestigious singles match down the line between the two. But unfortunately, that was the only time those two faced for the World Heavyweight Championship. But it was a nice moment for Ambrose to kind of like hug his best friend and then leave the ring for him to celebrate. And the story at the time was Triple H kind of presenting Roman with the option of becoming a part of the Authority because Rollins left. Obviously, he wasn't strong enough, but Roman's strong enough to be head of the Authority. Then Roman speared Triple H, and then directly right after that, boom, bro kick. And then 5 minutes and 15 seconds later, they even made a shirt out of it. Sheamus was the WWE champion, and nobody really bought it because this persona of Sheamus wasn't really taken as seriously. And another reason why this is the worst, just because creative-wise, it brought upon the League of Nations. What is the League of Nations, you ask? I'm glad you said that, listener, because the League of Nations was a faction, a subsidiary of the Authority between Sheamus, Rusev, Alberto Del Rio, and King Barrett. That's what it was, King Barrett. There was a rumor at the time that Kevin Owens was supposed to be a part of the League of Nations, but him and his son, I believe, got sick with the flu that week. So Kevin Owens was not in the plans of when the League of Nations were formed. And thank goodness for that, because the League of Nations, as admitted by Wade Barrett, was just a faction to be fall guys for Roman Reigns and help Roman get over. And to use a cash-in not to elevate the star that you're putting the championship on, but to elevate this other guy that is super miscast in this role is just mind-boggling to me. The Money in the Bank should be used to help the guy with the briefcase, not to help the guy who doesn't have the briefcase. And, you know, it was just a weird time because nobody liked Sheamus in that role. Nobody liked Roman in that role. And it just created more conflict for the people involved. It did more harm than good to everybody involved in it. So that's why it's my number 3 worst cash-in of all time. Oh boy, we're now down to the top 2. The second worst WWE cash-in of all time is Damien Sandow. Now, at this point when I'm watching, I didn't think Damien Sandow should have even been near the Money in the Bank briefcase. I thought that was the year of Cody. I was a massive Cody fan then, a massive Cody fan now. So it's just a little fun bias. But when he won Money in the Bank, I didn't think anything much of it. Again, like many of the Money in the Bank holders to begin with, he went on a huge losing streak. I think he went like something like 1-13 or something like that. It was a really bad record, I remember. He did have a sweet custom Money in the Bank briefcase, though. It was more like a office briefcase, a leather briefcase. But it would have been all worth it because, he's going to cash in. It's going to be great. Even though the World Heavyweight Championship at this point wasn't as prestigious, it was still a good notch in your belt to have. No pun intended. So what makes this cash in one of the worst is that John Cena won the night before the World Heavyweight Championship from Alberto Del Rio. There he is again. And Damian Sandow came out the next night in Raw and basically taunted Cena, saying, I'm going to cash in on you, but not tonight because I'm smarter than that, or what have you. He then attacked John Cena's injured elbow and just kept attacking it with the briefcase. He threw him into the steps. He used like a concerto-like motion. He slammed the chair onto the steps with the elbow, and he said, John, my time is now. And then he said, I'm cashing in. And in theory, beautiful way to try to cash in. Injure the champion, who's already coming off a horrific injury in general, and pick him when he's apart. So Sandow has a decent match with John Cena, about 10 minutes or so, but one attitude adjustment later, and Sandow loses. After all that damage that John Cena accumulated in the prior segment. And he still found a way to win. That's where the big match John kind of came from. But that did horrendous results to Sandow's career. He was never at that level again. He had some success with the Mizdow character. But this did him no favors because the champion was already weakened before he attacked him. He weakened him even more. And all it took was one AA to put him down. Now, the reason that Sandow was given, I think he did this in an Art of Wrestling podcast interview. I'm not sure. I know it was a podcast interview because I listened to it. The reason he was given to cash in on John Cena that night and fail was that WWE was against like the premiere of like Monday Night Football or something. And they just really needed a strong opening to that show. Sandow didn't protest. He said, all right, if that's what you want to do, I'll do it, being a true team player. And Sandow is a very good performer in his own right. He should have at least gotten, like, a United States or Intercontinental Championship run. I think he would have did wonders with that championship if they let him have that opportunity. But this was pretty much his one and only chance in that main event spotlight. And they didn't really capitalize on what Sandow could be in that company, in that role. And again, like I said, it's very unfortunate. And again, what makes this the worst, or one of the worst, is just, again, he beat them down. And we have seen people been beaten down for less. Like, I think when Edge was cashed in on, all it was a spine buster and a Batista bomb. And then Punk just cashed in, go to sleep, there you go. This one, they had like a legit back and forth match, even though Cena's arm was hanging by a thread in storyline, and he still came out on top. It just was kind of insulting as a viewer, saying, well, if a lot of all these other guys went through not as bad and still lost the championship, it was more to present Cena in a better light than it was the guy holding the briefcase, which should never be the case when you hold the Money in the Bank briefcase. All right, and number one. A lot of you guys saw this coming. It's Baron Corbin. Baron Corbin's the worst Money in the Bank cash-in of all time. Now, the reason why this is the worst Money in the Bank cash-in of all time. He tried to cash in on Jinder Mahal, who was probably one of the most unpopular WWE champions in recent history. Personally, I don't want you to hinder Jinder. He was presented well as a champion, just cosmetically wise. Just his in-ring work, in my opinion, didn't come up to snuff to the other champions that came before him. And with Baron Corbin, when he won the Money in the Bank ladder match, it was expected because he was their rising star on SmackDown. And in that ladder match, he was the logical choice, I guess you could say, for being a heel Money in the Bank contract holder, because Ziggler already held it and he was kind of winding down on the SmackDown brand. AJ was still freshly turned in his babyface feud. Shinsuke was still new. He didn't really need the briefcase. It wouldn't have hurt him, but I don't think he really needed it at that point. Kevin Owens had the United States Championship. Sami Zayn was still trying to find his own. So Baron Corbin was the next logical step to be that Money in the Bank briefcase holder. And his cash-in came in the week before SummerSlam. So Corbin was already booked to have a match against John Cena at that SummerSlam pay-per-view. Jinder Mahal was scheduled to defend his championship against Shinsuke Nakamura, just to kind of paint the picture on this. So this was the SmackDown before SummerSlam. So I think they were still on Thursdays at this point. So it was the Thursday before the Sunday pay-per-view. Now, logic dictates if Baron Corbin were to cash in and win on Jinder Mahal for the WWE Championship, his match with John Cena would be for the WWE Championship. At least that's the logic I'm trying to apply here. So what does John Cena do? This man hates Baron Corbin so much that he gave up a potential shot at the WWE Championship just to screw Corbin out of his cash-in. So Corbin cashes in against a weakened Jinder Mahal. Corbin's begging Jinder to come up to his feet. He's like, come on, come on. John Cena comes onto the apron. Corbin is distracted, punches John Cena off the apron, and Jinder Mahal hits the most devastating move in wrestling history, the roll-up, and gets the win. And Corbin's cash-in was relegated to nothing. Didn't do him any favors. He just got screwed by the biggest star in the company. And his feud with John Cena would end at that year's SummerSlam in one match. Opened the show, 10 minutes. John Cena over with the AA. Corbin was never really the same after that. He never was really taken as seriously as he once was when he held Money in the Bank contract. And I think that's where the fans' perception kind of changed with Baron Corbin. And that, okay, we don't really buy him as a top champion at this point. Which is unfortunate because Baron Corbin, at that time, he had a decent look, unique moves. I remember he did the sliding corner outside to the ring, and then he would come back and clothesline him. He had the deep six. He had the end of days. He has a really solid moveset, which is a shame that he gets the reactions he does, because it seems like every year his character changes. Like he was the Constable, and then he was King Corbin, and then he was Bum Corbin, which was highly entertaining, and then he was Happy Corbin, and now he's Baron Corbin, who's kind of like Bum Corbin, but he's dressing like Happy Corbin. And when you change those gimmicks in that short amount of time, it doesn't give the audience a chance to latch onto you as a character. And I believe it started with this failed Money in the Bank cash-in that no one really took him seriously at that high level anymore because of his failed cash-in and how the cash-in was done. Creatively, they didn't do Baron Corbin any favors, and it really didn't make him look like a major star at that point. Now, the rumor is why Baron Corbin's cash-in happened like this is that he had a disagreement with a doctor that WWE brought in on concussions, and Baron Corbin was talking about his own experiences in the NFL about concussion testing and was kind of going back and forth with the doctor about the severity of concussion testing. And I'm not sure if that's true or not. If that is true, it's just, it's a tough thing, because whether you know something's right and this is the right way to test things, and if another specialist is coming in by the company's dime saying, no, this is how the testing should do, and you speak up on that in concern for yourself and your peers, it's a sticky spot to be in. And it's unfortunate if that's the way things went down and that's the reason why he lost the contract. Because I think losing the contract in that manner definitely did hurt him in that way. So that was my worst Money in the Bank cash-ins. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know your worst Money in the Bank cash-ins at Retold Richie Mars on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. But before I go, I'm going to make my Money in the Bank predictions. I'm going to go through the whole card, see who's going to win the briefcases, who's going to win the matches, etc., etc. So for the men's Money in the Bank ladder match, we have Ricochet, Shinsuke Nakamura, LA Knight, Santos Escobar, Butch, Damian Priest, and Logan Paul. This is the first men's Money in the Bank ladder match in a while that we don't have a former world champion, so I like that direction in it. So I think they officially announced that this could be cashing in on any men's championship, which is a unique little twist, especially with the men's champions that we have now being Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Gunther, and Austin Theory currently. Would I like to win? Like most people, I would like LA Knight to win. The man is over as over can get. Loud reactions every week. Not a pin drop is happening during his matches. Everyone's so loud for him. I think he would be a fantastic Money in the Bank contract holder. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to win. I do think Logan Paul is going to win just because of the branding he brings. Imagine being on Impulsive Podcast and seeing the Money in the Bank briefcase every episode, every week. I think that's a smart way to broadcast the WWE name to an even bigger audience. So I think Logan Paul is going to take this one. But I'm not counting out Damian Priest. I also think he would be a dark horse pick to win this Money in the Bank ladder match, but I'm going to go with Logan Paul. For the women's Money in the Bank ladder match, it's Zelina Vega, Becky Lynch, Zoe Stark, Bayley, Io Sky, and Trish Stratus. I'm very interested on if they would give it to Trish Stratus. Trish Stratus has kind of had a career resurgence, but I would go for my dark horse pick. If a heel usually wins Money in the Bank in one match, then a babyface would usually win Money in the Bank in another match. So I'm going to go for a dark horse pick. I'm going to pick Zelina Vega. I'm going to pick her to win the Money in the Bank ladder match. I think she would need it. I think that would be a great way to propel her to a higher position on the card and be taken more seriously as a competitor. So I'm going to go with Zelina Vega. If I had a number 2 pick, I would probably pick Becky Lynch, but I'm going with Zelina Vega. Next is a match between Cody Rhodes and Dominic Mysterio. I love Cody Rhodes. He's my favorite wrestler in WWE at this point. But I'm going to pick Dominic Mysterio to win because I think Brock Lesnar is going to cost Cody Rhodes a match because Cody Rhodes keeps calling Brock Lesnar a coward. What better way to humiliate Cody Rhodes than losing against Dominic Mysterio? Gives Dominic Mysterio some bragging rights and puts Dominic Mysterio in a position higher than he was coming in. And people would just boo him mercifully, badly, easy for me to say. And I think it would do Dominic Mysterio a world of good. So Dominic Mysterio is my pick. Then we have Seth freaking Rollins versus Finn Balor. I'm going with Rollins, no surprise. I think it should be an excellent match. Should be probably one of the best matches they have ever had together. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think Seth Rollins is going to be the one to win against Finn Balor. Would Logan Paul possibly cash in on Seth Rollins? Another thing to think about right there. Next we have Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler defending their tag team championships against Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. No surprise, Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler I'm picking to retain. And I think we might get a shock turn of Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez with Liv going heel. But who knows if that's the case. That's just my own silly little prediction. But I am picking the tag champs to retain. Then finally we have the Bloodline Civil War as Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa faces off against the Usos. Now, this match is going to be really hype. I'm very excited to see where the story is going. I do think there's a possibility Roman Reigns gets pinned here, which will lead us to a match of him defending the championship against the Usos, because I can't see how Roman and Solo would win and the Usos getting that tag team, or excuse me, that WWE championship match at SummerSlam, if that is the direction they're going. So I'm picking the Usos to win, and imagine the crowd, imagine the pop if Jey Uso were to pin Roman Reigns, which would be mirroring Roman Reigns' first pinfall loss in WWE when Jey Uso pinned Roman Reigns in that match as well. So I'm picking the Usos to win and Jey Uso pinning Roman Reigns. Now, thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Wrestling Retold and Relived. I, of course, am Richie Mars. You could follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Retold Richie Mars. Everyone have a safe week. Everyone have a fun Money in the Bank. And I will see you next time. TTFN, ta-ta for now. See you later.